The moment I knew everything was about to implode, I was holding a cardboard box full of 11 years' worth of order. Awards I never hung. A stained coffee mug with certified calm in chipped gold lettering and one framed certificate. The only thing I left behind. I didn't say a word as I stepped out of Mason's glass tomb of an office, but that smug bastard, Mason, our shiny new COO, leaned back in his ergonomic throne and chirped after me like he was dismissing a temp. "Pack your trophies, Alicia." I didn't break stride, just nodded, slow and steady, the kind of nod that says, "You already lost, you just don't know how yet." David was standing by the printer, clutching a stack of audit logs like he'd seen a ghost. Poor guy looked like someone had unplugged the sun. I stopped just long enough to hand him a flash drive and say the only thing that mattered. "Keep your copies. You'll need them." They always think compliance is invisible until it isn't. Until the power gets cut, or the vendors freeze your accounts, or the feds come knocking, asking questions no one in legal can spell, let alone answer. Mason had been here 6 weeks, maybe 7. Said we were bloated, said my role was redundant. He wanted lean, he wanted fast, he wanted headlines for the board, cost efficiency through structural optimization. Translation: fire the quiet lady who never made a scene, who just happened to keep the entire regulatory skeleton from collapsing. I walked out without protest. No tears, no speech, just one small smile at the security guard, who had the decency to look away. I heard later Mason had them change my credentials by lunch, revoked my access, folded my department into legal like we were bad seasoning, and that would have been the end of it, except for one thing. That certificate I left behind? It was still valid, for exactly 72 more hours. And it wasn't just a certificate, it was the company's compliance tether. You see, we weren't registered under the company's name. We were tied to my individual certification, an ugly little loophole we had to use when our original charter expired back in 2019 and legal didn't file the renewal on time. My credentials were the duct tape on the regulatory pipeline, and without a proper handoff, without filing the right transition notice with state and federal regulators, the moment that certification expired, so did our status. Nobody read that clause. I made sure of it. David, bless him, was always the one person who watched the edges. Never loud, never messy, but always noticing. He didn't protest when I left, but I know damn well he started backing up files the minute I was gone. I'd trained him too well not to. There's a backup buried deep in that system with a timestamp only I could set. One final gift. One final fuse. And if you're enjoying this unraveling of corporate arrogance, take a moment. Really, hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people who hear stories like this never do, and it means the world to the folks behind the scenes keeping it all running, just like I used to. By the end of that week, Mason would be choking on legal briefs, the board would be screaming for answers, and David would be the only one in the building with a roadmap. All because of a single sentence buried in the compliance continuity clause, written in my voice, signed in my hand, and tethered to a ticking clock. Tick. Tock. Mason strutted into the all-hands meeting like he'd just solved climate change with a pie chart. His sleeves rolled up, hair gelled like a televangelist, and that same smug smirk on his face, like we should thank him for the corporate enema he was administering. "We're streamlining," he announced, pacing like he'd watched too many TED Talks. "Compliance is no longer a standalone function. It's embedded into legal now. We'll move faster, leaner, smarter." I stood in the back of the room. No badge, no laptop. Just a plain blue folder in my arms with nothing but my resignation exit papers inside. I wasn't there to argue. I was there to watch. You could feel the shift, like the air in a room when someone says, "fire," but grins while they say it. Legal clapped. HR nodded. A few of my old analysts stared at their shoes. David, though, he didn't move. He just blinked, slowly, like a server booting up in safe mode. He knew what they didn't. The whole damn system they were clapping for was about to hit a wall. By the time I reached the parking lot, my credentials were gone, revoked, wiped from the system. My name stripped from the signature logs, my admin access rerouted. My personal vault of compliance artifacts flagged for internal migration. They had no clue what they were even looking at. They started copy-pasting my frameworks into new templates like this was Pinterest, and not a federal liability minefield. David pinged a few files that afternoon. A memo I'd written 3 years ago about third-party data storage timelines. A policy note on credential chain of custody. He clicked a link to one of my core tracking sheets. Broken. Another one, access denied. Legal had tried to overwrite my permissions, but hadn't transferred the custodial metadata. Idiots didn't even know they'd locked themselves out of their own continuity plan. Then it surfaced. A memo nobody expected. I'd set it to reappear once my credentials were unlinked. Just a quiet little PDF that pinged the internal audit folder. State Compliance Office, upcoming review, 14 days, contact, licensed compliance officer on record. That line was going to age like milk, because as of that morning, the only compliance officer on record was me, and my license was set to expire in, 62 hours? David found it first. He didn't raise a red flag, didn't forward it to legal. He just sat there, chewing the inside of his cheek, watching the company chisel its own tombstone. He started downloading local backups, archived memos, certificates of attestation. I know because I saw the log pings later. He was working methodically, not to save Mason, not to warn anyone, but to build a record, for when the system collapsed and everyone pretended they didn't know. They always pretend they didn't know. Mason, meanwhile, was already booking press interviews about efficiency upgrades. Told the board we'd saved $440K in Q1 by eliminating redundant architecture. Left out the part where he also eliminated the only valid regulatory anchor we had. I'd warned them, years ago actually. In policy training, in risk assessments, in that one slide Mason didn't bother reading. Credential transitions must follow registered authority protocols. Failure to notify results in credential lapse and potential federal hold. Legal had laughed. Said I was too rigid, too cautious. Said, "This isn't the IRS, Alicia." Turns out, it kinda was. The feds don't care about optimism. They care about names, timestamps, proof that someone, somewhere, held the key and didn't drop it. And that key? It was dangling, rusted, and days away from vanishing completely. Tick, tock. David wasn't the kind of guy who panicked. That's what made him good. Quiet, methodical, always 10 steps deep in a spreadsheet while everyone else chased the next buzzword. He didn't talk unless he had to, but when he opened that bookmarked file, the one I'd shared with him after a particularly nasty vendor audit, his breath caught for just a second. It wasn't the file he expected. The title was the same, Credential Custody Register, but the content had changed, replaced. All it said was, "This certification expires in 72 hours. Active Custodial Authority, A. Vance." Plain text. No emojis, no header. Just a message sitting in the middle of the screen like a landmine someone forgot to bury. He read it twice, 3 times. He knew what it meant. The credential I held, my individual compliance certification, the one tied to our federal and state filings, was about to lapse. And there was no transition on file. No delegation, no update to the regulatory systems that said someone else, anyone else, was now the named authority, which meant we were standing on a trap door. David didn't go nuclear, didn't forward it to the exec team or ping the panic button. Instead, he walked calmly, too calmly, over to the glass fishbowl legal now called their integration hub. He flagged the file quietly to Lauren, the junior associate who'd somehow been tapped to lead compliance. Integration. She was chewing a pen and typing one-handed, barely glanced up. "Oh, that?" she said, squinting. "Yeah, Mason said we'll just renew under his name." David blinked once. "Renew?" "Yeah, he's going to register as the compliance officer. It's just a title thing, right?" David's silence said more than any audit report ever could. Because here's the thing. Credential reissue isn't like renewing a parking pass. You don't just slap a new name on the form and hit submit. Regulatory systems require a formal notice of custodial transfer, a process that takes minimum 7 business days, and that's if the application is filed correctly. If there's any discrepancy, missing dates, bad metadata, conflicting sign-offs, the process halts, flags the entity as in transition, and sends alerts to every agency the company reports to. Oh, and if there's no active officer listed, automatic suspension of compliance standing, which triggers payment holds, which triggers contract reviews, which You get the picture. David knew all this. I drilled it into him during our postmortems, after every audit, every inspection, every near miss. I'd made him practice pulling credential chains like fire drills. Always verify the officer of record before assuming continuity. That was rule number 1. He walked out of legal's fishbowl without saying another word. Didn't email anyone, didn't mention it to Mason. He just returned to his desk, opened our shared server, and began printing. Hundreds of pages, chain of custody documents, credential maps, system logs, audit history, every document with my name on it, every timestamp, every signature. He didn't know if they'd try to spin it later, say I never warned them, that it was an oversight, a legacy technical gap, or some other corporate euphemism. But he wasn't going to let them rewrite the script. He started labeling folders. One red, one blue, one green, one labeled AV, one labeled Do Not Alter. He backed up encrypted copies to a personal drive and mailed one to a P.O. box he hadn't used in years. Because David knew what was coming. He didn't know when, but he could feel the current pulling, the floor creaking, the dam swelling. They thought compliance was paperwork, but it wasn't. It was bone-deep structure. It was the quiet stitching between legality and collapse. And I'd spent 11 years sewing every thread. And now they were standing on it with a box of scissors. Tick, tock. It was a Thursday. Mid-morning. Office smelled like burnt K-cups and stale ambition. David was knee-deep in Q1 audit prep, toggling between spreadsheets when his desk phone rang. An actual phone. Not a Slack ping. That alone made his stomach tighten. Only government offices still called landlines. He picked it up on the third ring. David Sloan. Mr. Sloan, this is Cassandra with the State Compliance Office. We've been trying to verify your current active compliance lead. We received no transfer notice after Alicia Vance's departure. He didn't speak for a second too long, just enough for Cassandra to gently follow up. Do you know who holds that credential now? David's mouth was dry. One moment, he said, already pulling up the credential transition log. It should have taken 2 clicks. Mason was supposed to submit the new officer of record form, Form 66B if David remembered correctly. Alicia used to recite the codes like prayers, but the folder was empty. No PDF, no timestamp, no submission ticket, no delegation of authority. He toggled over to the credential ledger, the one tied to the compliance certificate Alicia left behind. It still listed her name in clean blue font, Active Certifying Officer, Vance, A, and beneath it, in a red timestamp, credential status, inactive as of 48 hours ago. 2 days. That's how long they'd been floating without a legal compliance backbone. 2 full business days in open violation, and no one had even noticed. Or worse, they had noticed and figured they could bluff through it. Mr. Sloan? Cassandra's voice snapped him back. We need a point of contact on file by end of day. Otherwise, we'll be escalating the non-verification. He swallowed. I'll get back to you shortly. He hung up. Didn't even pretend to breathe for a moment. Then he turned toward the glass conference room where legal now parked itself like royalty. Mason wasn't there, probably off polishing his LinkedIn headline again, but Lauren was, still typing like she was trying to hit a deadline for a job she didn't understand. David opened a new email. No fluff, no pleasantries, just the truth. We are currently without an active compliance credential on file. The certification held by A. Vance expired 48 hours ago. No transition was submitted. The State Compliance Office has made contact. He CC'd legal, HR, and Mason. Hit send. Then he waited. Nothing. No reply, no meeting request, no walkover from Mason in faux outrage asking what he meant. Just silence. Like they thought ignoring it might reverse the clock. David clicked open the internal policy hub. His eyes moved like a machine, scanning transition documents, comparing credential logs, cross-referencing the last sign-offs Alicia had performed before being walked out like an intern with a box full of memories. Every single compliance flag was tied to her signature, every single one. And not a single handoff. He scrolled down to the alert history. A line of system logs, alerts disabled at the admin level. The timestamp? 4 hours after Alicia left the building. User, M. Holloway Mason. He hadn't just failed to transition authority, he'd actively turned off the watchdogs. Probably thought he was silencing spammy reminders. Didn't realize those alerts were the only thing standing between the company and a legal freefall. David leaned back, eyes on the ceiling. Somewhere in the HVAC hum above, he could hear the beginning of collapse. The kind that starts not with a bang, but with a missed form and a quiet phone call from a woman named Cassandra, who's just doing her job. He got up, walked to the office printer, and without a word, began printing the logs, the emails, the system trail. Mason had fired the glue. Thought he could tape the cracks together with confidence and posturing, but the dam had started to hiss. And David was done waiting for someone else to plug the leak. Tick, tock. Mason was all teeth and tie knots that morning. Fresh haircut, new tie, some loud Navy thing that screamed, "I vacation in yachts I don't own." He was pacing in the boardroom, rehearsing his little song and dance for the investors about optimized cost centers and operational refinement. Translation, he'd canned half of compliance and rebranded it as innovation. I watched from my desk, sipping burnt coffee while he beamed at his own reflection in the blank TV screen. A laminated printout sat on the table beside him. Projected savings from redundant headcount removal. My name wasn't on it, but Alicia's sure as hell was. Across the floor, legal was scrambling. They'd gotten a notice just before 8 a.m. that a team from the state compliance office was in transit for an unannounced review. Surprise audits are rare. You only get one when a red flag's been tripped, and tripped hard. David didn't say anything when the security gate pinged and 3 people in Navy windbreakers stepped into reception. No fanfare, no smiles. One clipped badge read, Shanice Ford, lead auditor. She didn't stop to shake hands. Just asked one thing. Who currently holds your active compliance certification? Legal froze, not paused, froze. Lauren looked at Mason, who looked like he'd just been asked to recite the alphabet backwards while skydiving. I do, he said eventually, clearing his throat. I assumed the role after our previous officer, after she exited. Shanice didn't nod, didn't blink, just flipped a thin packet in her hand and held up a single page. That's not what we show. Silence. From my seat, I watched a bead of sweat crawl from Mason's temple into the side of his perfectly gelled hair. His jaw flexed. There must be a processing delay. We filed the transfer paperwork last week. Shanice raised an eyebrow. Mind if we verify? Legal muttered something about pulling up internal logs. That's when David stood. You might want to check the system logs first, he said, voice steady, like he was reading from a script he'd memorized a long time ago. Credential handoffs should be time-stamped, unless someone disabled the alert settings. Now everyone was looking at him. Mason barked, "What are you even talking about, David?" David didn't flinch, just walked over to the terminal near the meeting console, typed in his access, and opened the compliance alert history. He didn't need to dig. It was all right there. Bright red rows of deactivation notices. Credential monitoring. Disabled system alerts, suppressed user, M. Holloway time, 14:32, day of termination. He stepped back and gestured politely. Shanice leaned in, took one look, and whistled through her teeth. You manually disabled regulatory alerting? She asked, not even pretending to sound casual. Mason blustered. That's not what happened. I was just trying to cut noise. Those systems are outdated. They send a ton of garbage pings and half of it isn't even relevant. Shanice didn't respond. She turned to her colleague, said, Open a 77B, possible tampering. Her tone didn't rise, her pace didn't change, but that word, tampering, landed like a shovel to the ribs. David looked down, hands in his pockets, and let the weight hang there. He didn't gloat, didn't smirk, just watched. The way you watch a house of cards fall when you already know which one was loose. I had left them one tether, one clock, and Mason had cut it with the grace of a man rearranging deck chairs on a burning ship. The worst part? He still didn't realize the fire had already breached the hull. Tick, tock. The fallout didn't come with alarms. It came with auto emails and locked dashboards. At 10:41 a.m., the company's billing system froze. Not crashed. Froze. Outbound payments to federal clients paused. No confirmation emails. just a gray banner across the vendor portal. Pending verification of compliance credential. Status, suspended. By 11:07, our two largest suppliers had their accounts halted due to unverified operational compliance. Purchase orders bounced. Support queues lit up. Someone from procurement actually asked if the Wi-Fi was down. By 11:24, a new message blinked across the executive finance console. Non-compliance event flagged. System audit required before next payment cycle. Issuer, Fed Reg Control. That's when Mason stopped smiling. I was on the far side of the floor when he erupted, pacing like a cornered rat in that overpriced wool blazer, voice cracked from trying to yell calmly. Why wasn't I told? How the hell did we get flagged? Who's in charge of updating the credential? Lauren? Legal stammered. HR ducked. David didn't flinch. He stood by the server desk, holding a single page from one of Alicia's archived folders, printed, time-stamped, highlighted like it was a holy scroll. He didn't raise his voice. Just looked Mason in the eye and said flatly, "You fired the only one who understood the timelines." Mason's face twitched. "This is ridiculous. Those alerts should have gone to the team." "They did," David said. "You just turned them off." More silence. And then Lauren, the one who used to roll her eyes in policy meetings, squeaked out, I think we found something in the internal archive. It's a clause. Legal says it's binding." She handed Mason a printed PDF. The page was stiff from the printer heat, the kind of paper no one ever reads until it's already too late. At the top, Alicia's watermark in faint gray. Midway down the page, Clause 7.4, Officer Termination Protocol. Termination of a certified compliance officer without filed regulatory transition shall immediately void compliance continuity status, triggering audit escalation and operational freeze pending review. Mason read it 3 times, then sat down like someone had unplugged his spine. He looked around the room, blinking, as if the fluorescent lights had betrayed him. This wasn't in the summary packet legal gave me. David didn't even try to hide it anymore. She was the summary packet. And just like that, someone whispered the words Mason had been dreading since the auditors walked through the front door. "We need to summon the board." The air shifted. Phones started buzzing. You could feel it in your throat, like static before a thunderclap. Compliance wasn't a department anymore. It was a crime scene. And Mason? He wasn't the architect of a lean new system. He was just the guy who kicked out the structural beam and lit a match. By noon, the boardroom was sealed. Video conference initiated. Faces in suits appeared on screen, all blinking confusion until someone read the clause aloud. Clause 7.4, one of them muttered. Jesus. This was real? David slid a folder across the table. Inside, Alicia's original transition protocol draft. Flagged, rejected, and never signed. All the warnings had been there, all the documents. They just thought they could delete the person and keep the structure. Now they were learning what Alicia had always known. Structure only holds if someone understands it. Tick, tock. The boardroom smelled like cold coffee and dread. 12 people on video call, 3 in the room, 1 man, Mason, sinking inch by inch into the leather chair that wasn't going to protect him now. He kept looking at the glass wall behind him like it might crack open and offer him a back exit. The lead auditor, Shanice, stood by the display, flipping through her packet with the cold efficiency of someone who'd seen this exact screw-up before. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Truth sat heavy in the room now, and no amount of buzzwords could dress it up. She turned to the board. Her certification expired 48 hours ago. Who, she paused for a dramatic wait, okayed the termination? No one answered. You could have heard a spreadsheet load. Mason looked to legal. Legal looked to HR. HR looked like they wanted to fake a seizure. David stepped forward. No grandstanding, no smirk, just calm precision. He pulled a printed folder from his bag, opened it like a surgeon about to operate. I've prepared a timeline, he said, starting from the day Alicia Vance was terminated to the moment her credential expired and the events that followed. He walked them through it, methodically, each log, each system notice, the missed submission, the flag from Cassandra at the state office, the auto hold from the vendor portal, the federal suspension, the email to legal that never got a reply, every breadcrumb, every silence, all of it documented. At slide 8, Mason tried to speak. I don't think we need to. Shanice lifted a hand. You manually disabled the credential alerts? Mason's jaw locked. Well, yes, but only because the system was outdated. It was producing redundant messages, and She held up her own printout, highlighted in pink. User M. Holloway, compliance alerts disabled, credential expiry notifications suppressed, timestamp 3:32 p.m. Her voice didn't change. That's tampering. Mason's lips parted, but nothing came out. A director on the far screen took off his glasses and set them on the table with a sigh. David, he asked, tired and blunt, why didn't you raise this sooner? David didn't flinch. I flagged it to legal the same day. I've sent 4 notices since. I've preserved every log. I didn't escalate it directly to the board because I believed, wrongly, that our leadership team would act. Another silence. Then came the question no one wanted to ask, but everyone needed answered. A voice from the far end of the conference line. Board chair, probably, though no one remembered his name before this call. Can we reinstate Alicia? The question dropped like an anchor. David didn't blink. Not without admitting negligence. Her license has lapsed. Reinstating her would require filing an exception request with the state, acknowledging the compliance break, and submitting to a full Tier 2 audit. Someone cursed under their breath. Mason looked like he might puke. David looked down at his notes, then back up. She left a transition protocol, he said. She drafted everything, but it was rejected. By whom? Someone asked. David didn't look at Mason. He didn't have to. The room didn't breathe for a full 10 seconds. The power had shifted, and David felt it. He didn't gloat. He didn't posture, but he didn't reach for a life raft to throw Mason either. He was done saving people who burned the map. Tick, tock. The official word was administrative leave, but everyone knew Mason had been benched. His badge was deactivated by 3 Zug p.m., his Slack profile grayed out by 3:07. One of the interns said he left through the freight elevator, tie loose, face blank, eyes like he'd just learned gravity was optional and someone had turned it off. Legal was spinning like a blender set to puree. PR scrambled to draft a holding statement about unanticipated credential misalignment. Meanwhile, the payment systems were still gridlocked. Clients weren't getting invoices. Federal reimbursements were frozen under clause suspension. Vendors started using words like breach and penalty clause. And then the number hit. Valuation down 14.6% in a day. By morning, a third-party compliance firm had been contracted on emergency terms. A stiff, polished team from Boston with too many vowels in their last names and zero patience for corporate drama. They set up shop in the old conference room Alicia used to call the bunker. And within minutes, they were asking for access, policies, any trace of a continuity plan. David sat across from the lead consultant, calm but exhausted, a man who'd carried a whole building's blind arrogance on his back for the last 4 days. Are you willing to serve as interim? The consultant asked, eyes not quite pleading but definitely hopeful. Just until we stabilize. David shook his head. That's not my role. The consultant leaned back. Then we'll need to reconstruct everything, every chain, every log. David reached into his bag and pulled out a matte black flash drive. No label on the outside, just a strip of red electrical tape around the tip. He slid it across the table. The consultant picked it up. What's on here? David's voice was quiet. Continuity plan, vendor chain, credential workflows, pre-expiry mitigation strategy. It's the full playbook. Whose? David just smiled faintly. Alicia Vance. She called it the fail-safe. The consultant turned the drive in his hand. Why didn't she give it to us directly? David shrugged. You'll see. They plugged it into a sandbox terminal. A folder opened. Continuity shot fail-safe. By AV. Inside, organized subfolders, timestamps, credential chains, transition templates, regulatory contacts, even a step-by-step guide for reinstating vendor trust cycles. Everything legal had tried to cobble together in chaos, sitting quietly in this drive the whole time. But one file sat at the top, labeled in all caps, open only if trust is restored. It was a single red PDF, password locked. The consultant looked at David. What's the password? He shook his head. I don't know it. I think she meant it literally. They stared at the screen, that red file pulsing like a warning beacon in a sea of structure. No speech followed, no applause, just a quiet awareness settling over the room. Alicia had prepared for this. Not out of malice, not out of ego, but out of the understanding that people like Mason would always rise fast, cut corners, and think governance was a formality. David stood to leave. He looked at the drive once more, then at the consultant. She never wanted credit, he said. Just stability. Outside the glass, the company was still glitching, emails bouncing, dashboards stuck, accounts needing revalidation. But inside that flash drive, Alicia had already rebuilt the skeleton. Quietly, precisely, just like she always did. The firm wouldn't fully recover. Not quickly. Maybe not ever in the way it was before. But it would survive. And that was Alicia's real trophy. Tick. Tock. It came in a plain envelope. No return address, no stamp, just slid under David's apartment door sometime between Tuesday evening and the kind of Wednesday morning that starts with a headache before coffee. The handwriting was unmistakable. Block letters, steady and even, the way someone writes when they've trained their whole life not to flinch under pressure. Inside was a single note, folded once, no signature. They asked me back. I said no, hope the plan helped. No flourish, no closure, and yet it said everything. The office was quieter now. Compliance had become a ghost town with new signs slapped on the doors and temp contractors plugging in like surgeons in someone else's body. The third-party firm stayed on retainer, but their tone had shifted from urgent to cautious, like a team trying to rebuild a bridge over a minefield without the original blueprint. The company managed to claw back minimal operational compliance. Vendors were slowly reactivating. Federal systems begrudgingly unfroze the pipes. But the trust? The trust was gone. Investors stopped using words like confident and started using phrases like reputational recalibration. Clients pulled out of auto renewals. One even filed a breach claim. No press release mentioned Mason's departure. His name just vanished. One day it was there, with his smug headshot and MBA babble, and the next it was a blank space between legal and HR. The only trace left behind was the echo of his voice barking over people who warned him. People he never listened to. David didn't take over Alicia's office. They offered. HR even emailed twice about furniture preferences. He ignored both. But a week after the storm settled, he found himself in that room anyway. Same soft hum of the ventilation system. Same crack in the plaster she used to stick a sticky note over with the words, "Do not ignore structural damage." He stood in the doorway for a long time, not thinking, just remembering. Then he stepped inside, walked over to the shelf, and pulled a small cardboard box from his bag. Inside was the one thing Alicia hadn't taken with her. The one thing Mason told her to pack as a punchline. Her trophy. It wasn't fancy. Just a dull little plaque from some long-forgotten industry board. Outstanding regulatory excellence. A. Vance. He set it on the shelf. Dead center. Perfectly level. Didn't dust the desk. Didn't move the chair. Didn't touch a single file. He just stood there, watching that trophy reclaim its rightful space. Because for all Mason's cutting and rebranding and redefining of roles, Alicia had never been redundant. She'd been the beam, the bracket, the thread that kept everything from sliding apart. And when they pushed her out, they thought she'd go quietly and leave nothing behind. But what she left was a mirror, and a warning, and a plan. David looked once more at the trophy and whispered, not to the room, not even to himself, just into the quiet that Alicia once owned. They told her to pack it, but it always belonged here.